Well, let me try something else here. I've given the right wing objection. It's unfair. It's unjustified. It's racist. It's South Africa-esque. That would, you know, be a kind of classical liberal objection. But I could give a left wing objection too, which is that it sunders the working class coalition that you need to get real reform. That the claims of historical racial victimization, while perhaps valid in terms of historical truth, are secondary to the imperatives of contemporary structural reform. You know, suppose you don't like capitalism. Suppose you think the welfare state should be bigger. Suppose you think there should be universal early childhood education. Suppose you think there should be a guaranteed minimum income. Suppose, you know, and on in that vein, which are structural reforms of a progressive character that can only be brought fully into being through the support of a broad-based coalition that cuts across racial lines of people addressing themselves to those reforms. Do those reforms and you'll have a much better society. You'll have a society where kids don't go to school hungry, where wayward teenagers don't end up being consigned to life in prison because they go from one crime to another in one car. There'll be help for drug addicts. There'll be help for the homeless. There'll be decent housing. Everything Matthew Desmond, the sociologist at Princeton, whose famous book about housing insecurity in Milwaukee, Evicted, won a Pulitzer Prize, and who's got a new book out now about American poverty that's very trenchant and powerful. It was excerpted in the Times Magazine, and he's a force to be reckoned with. Everything he wants, Matt Desmond, my buddy, lefty, everything he wants can only be gotten if Black people who work for a living and white people who work for a living and the Asians and the Latina and all of that get on the same page. Now, if you've got a symbolic identitarian politics of racial reparations, you're cutting against that. Why would you frame your effort to make the society a better place in those terms? Blacks want to cut a side deal with America so that the racial wealth gap will get narrowed instead of lending a hand to the generations-long project of creating a decent society for everybody. If you did the latter, the former would take care of itself. So there you are. I'm against it for all those reasons too. Say that. I think Bernie Sanders, I'm not a Sanders supporter. My wife will be the first person to tell you that, who is a rabid Bernie Sanders supporter, at least the old Bernie Sanders back in the day before he compromised and sold out to the Democratic Party. That's what my wife would say. But I think Bernie Sanders, during that 2016 campaign and also during the 2020 campaign, represented an idea about progressive reform that transcended. He took flack, Bernie Sanders did, from certain diversity, equity, and inclusion advocates for not being foursquare behind reparations, because he recognized that his movement required a trans-ethnic span that the reparations issue cut against. So I do think that you can make that argument.
But you know, Glenn, I actually think if these new reparations efforts actually bear fruit, and you know, most of them won't, but let's say it happened, I'm not going to stand athwart people in Evanston, Illinois, being given a good deal on mortgages, Black people in Evanston, Illinois. I don't think I would stand athwart every Black person in San Francisco, like all 16 of them, given $1 million. But the thing is...
why not? Why not? I just want to press you on that a little bit. Why would you not put your credibility on the line, as I just did, because to object to these policies?
Well, you see, in a way, I am standing athwart, but I would say I would not stand athwart, because what would it hurt? Okay, so there's this woman with 3 kids, and she gets $1 million. And first of all, it would be taxed, but she puts some of it away and she uses some of it to get a nice house. What's so terrible about that in itself?
But the white woman didn't get it. There's no free lunch. You just redistributed it. You didn't create anything. You just took somebody else's money and gave it to someone on the basis of their race. That's what's wrong with that.
And here's what I say. I cannot get behind that if it wouldn't be the end. Like, if that's the way it's going to be, and this Irish descended person doesn't get it because they were white and Black people are Black. For me, if that happens, it has to be it. It has to be, okay, problem solved. We have, atoned for the racism of the past, including up to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Now we move on living. And the problem is that you can tell from things that reparations advocates even now say that all that money, even that would be just a beginning. The same people would be making the same noise, same stuff. Societal racism is everywhere. And the idea would be they better not think reparations solves the problem. They better not think they can treat us like animals for 400 years and just pay us off. Yeah, that's what it would be. And so reparations are just a beginning. That would be the screensavers. And no, not if it's not going to change anything. And I would only be able to support this if a representative number of people said, this will give us a sense that race has really turned a corner in this country. But I don't think that those people are going to do it because their anti-racism is a state of mind, not a pragmatic political plan. So in a way, it brings me to you. No, we're not going to give that woman $1 million if people who consider themselves Black leaders and Black creators and Black artists are then the next day going to still have their arms crossed and saying they live in a racist Armageddon. No, not if it's just a beginning. And I hate to say about people who have good intentions that I don't know that I could trust them to let the theatrics go because they want to be Stokely Carmichael. That's all they're ever going to do.
But you'd be willing to pay them off if they could commit upon receiving the payment not to make any more trouble.
I don't know if I'm talking about that woman, but Black leaders, Black writers, people who supposedly speak for us, they have to make that commitment.
And they won't and they can't.
They can't. And so that's what reparations is for me. All the movers and shakers would insist it was just the beginning, whereas I would only accept it if it were considered the end. I've written contemptuous articles about reparations in the past, just saying it already happened and it's not necessary now. And then there's also the argument that to trace Black ills now to slavery or Jim Crow or redlining is vastly oversimplified. But there comes a time, Glenn, when at least I want to not be a contrarian just to be a contrarian. I just want to be honest with myself. And if reparations really is showing some chance of happening, and this business of it happening in city after city possibly makes it look like it might happen, I don't know if I feel so strongly against the payments in themselves that I'm going to keep on saying no, 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 for the same reasons. But I would definitely say it would be the most depressing thing I had ever seen on race in my life. And yes, including George Floyd, the most depressing thing I've ever seen on race in my lifetime would be if in 50 or 60 cities across the nation, generous reparations payments were given to everybody who chalks themselves up as Black. And yet the race debate stayed exactly the way it is, with the same DEI nonsense and the same apocalyptic vision of the role that racism supposedly plays. It would break my heart to see that happen. And unfortunately, it's the only way I can conceive of it being, although maybe I lack imagination.